As to Jeffrey, he's a pioneer and social activist and the co-founder and CEO of the Dharma Bums Temple. It's a community hub in San Diego that welcomes hundreds of people weekly for free meditation and Buddhist education. He left a successful consulting career, and after leaving a Taiwanese monastery, Jeffrey dedicated his life to service. Through his work, he has brought the mental health benefits of mindfulness to over 100,000 people since 2003, establishing free meditation programs in prison, homelessness shelters, schools, and for diverse groups, including active military with PTSD, seniors, and victims of domestic violence. As a founder of the Meditation Initiative and the Delta Beta Tau Buddhist Fraternity and SDSU, he's a leading voice in Engaged Buddhism, focusing on how to transform inner practice into compassion and hands-on action. So I'll hand it over to you, Jeffrey, and please take it away. Thank you, everybody.
I want to give a brief, and I'll run through it kind of quickly, but I wanted to give a very brief introduction to kind of how I got into this journey and really what started me into and on this engaged Buddhist path. But born in Chicago, moved to San Diego when I was 4 in 1979. I just turned 50 years old, and grew up high school, angry, depressed, lots of fights, lots of trouble, did a lot of stuff I shouldn't have done. I'm sure none of you can relate to any of that. And when I was in college, I took a Chinese civilization class, and also was, as a psychology student, professor said to me, "Jeff, you're a pretty angry, depressed kid. You should try some meditation." And so this is 30 years ago. Nothing else was healthy, seemed to work. I'm reading Intro to Zen by D.T. Suzuki. I'm doing meditation for 3 weeks. And at that time, I was working in a group home, counseling adolescent females, all who'd been through tremendous trauma, physical, sexual, emotional abuse. So I'm 20 years old. These kids are 14 with trauma. And having an entire 3 weeks of meditation under my belt, I felt that was the perfect time, and I was fully qualified to lead other people in meditation after 3 weeks of experience. So I will never forget this moment. I sat with these 7 kids. We closed our eyes. We breathed for 5 minutes. I opened my eyes, and the whole world seemed different. And that continues to inspire me to this day. So I graduated college, and as every nice Jewish kid from Del Cerro, nice is debatable, but I'm supposed to be a doctor, a lawyer, be a consultant, make a lot of money. So I graduated college thinking if I made a lot of money, bought a lot of stuff, I'd be perfectly happy. So I did all of that. I wish I'd saved some of it. I don't have any of it left, but I made a lot of money, bought a lot of stuff, and I was still completely miserable. So 2003, I started going to a Buddhist temple here in San Diego called Xifang Temple, part of Hoguan Shan. It's a Taiwanese-based temple, a Chinese-based master, Master Xing Yung. So I was there about 2.5 years, and eventually moved to their monastery in Taiwan for 11 months, but I'll get to that in a minute. When I started going to the temple, Venerable Yizhe, my first teacher, dear friend, a Buddhist nun from Taiwan, she said, "Jeff, you work so hard, make so much money to buy so many things. If you didn't have so many things, you wouldn't need so much money, you wouldn't have to work so hard." And she told me this like a month in. And so all of a sudden it just clicked. And I said, well, then what do I do? And she said, go help people. Now, I'm a spoiled, privileged. I have every privilege in the book, you name it. Straight, male, white, Jewish, able-bodied, every privilege is sitting right here. And she said, go help people. So I remember getting in my car and just driving down San Diego Balboa Park and seeing people just walking up the street, pushing electric wheelchair and going into restaurants and kind of the downtown area, outside restaurants, and buying food for people. And I'd go back to the temple and I said, well, what do I do now? And she said, just keep helping people. About 2 months into that, she said, we need somebody to take over our prison program downtown San Diego. Or somebody announced they needed somebody to take over the prison program. And Venerable Yizhe said, Jeff will do it. Again, I'm now 2 months into my Buddhist study and zero experience going into a prison. So I started going into the prison, what now, 22 years ago. And I remember going into the prison, and I would go in there for about an hour and a half. I'd lead a meditation, a little Dharma discussion, and I was still incredibly angry, incredibly depressed. I would walk out of this prison and I felt like I was the greatest person in the world. And it just drastically changed my life. I always felt to this day, for doing prison work for so many years, that I benefit so much more than the men and women inside that I have worked with, and the kids as well. But I did this for about 2.5 years. And then she said, Jeff, you want to move to our monastery in Taiwan? So I said, of course. And so I left everything I was doing, walked away from the money, the house, the cars, all of that, moved to a Buddhist monastery in Gaston. Again, Foguanshan, this is their home, southern part of Taiwan, and lived in essence in the Buddhist college with the monks, living monk life. I'm not a monk. I've never been a monk. I'd be a terrible monk, but I lived that life. No money, no keys, no wallet, no phone for 11 months. And 9 months in, Venerable Buddha said to me, how are you doing? And I said, great. I don't want to leave. I want to spend the rest of my life here. And she said, wonderful. It's time for you to go. And I said, what do you mean? I don't want to go anywhere. I'm happy here. And she said, you need to go back to San Diego and figure out how to introduce what you've learned into the people and the place and the culture that you know. Now, to full kind of disclosure, she had spent about 12 years in San Diego, so she knew the temple and the community very well. So I came back to San Diego. This is 2006. I was in the monastery February 5 to January 6. I come back in 2006. I spent about 6 months back in the temple. And I realized that, I was a pretty stubborn kid. I was part of a larger organization. And I just felt like there were ways to introduce meditation and Buddhist practice into our culture that I was really struggling with in what I call cultural Buddhist temple, a Taiwanese, Chinese-based community, who I'm very close friends with, very dear with, but just a lot of differences in the way Western people will learn Buddhism versus what was going on at that temple at the time. So I came together with a couple friends that had access to this place downtown. And I said, well, let's just start our own thing. And we didn't even know what that meant, but we came together and we liked Bob Dylan, we liked Jack Kerouac, we liked Buddhism, we liked meditation. And so what are we going to call this thing? And we said, well, how about the Dharma Bums? So 19 years ago, coming up the end of this year, we opened up the Dharma Bums Temple, a little loft space we were at for 10 years. We moved 8 years ago to where we're at now to introduce Buddhist practice to local folks. To give it some context, we are not a lineage. We are not a specific tradition. We don't have monks or nuns, and this is important in a minute. We bring in, guest speakers, monks and nuns and lamas and things like that, but we're a lay community. And our focus is on the Bodhisattva practice of engaging in community. So we see probably 600 people a week. All the people who come here are probably pretty new to Buddhism. And for many of them, it's their first exposure to Buddhist teaching. We try to make it comfortable and accessible. But then the question is, what do we do with them when they show up? A lot of people come here thinking they want to meditate. They think that if their life is a crazy, hectic, stressed out mess, that they should just meditate, or the therapist told them to meditate, or whatever it is that meditation is going to fix them. And the message we tell them, that I go back to 2003, is if you want to help yourself, go help people. To me, and many of you, most of you know this, it's the root of our suffering, second noble truth, the greed, the anger, the ignorance. We overcome the greed with the practice of dana, that craving, that desire, the practice of generosity. But in our culture, I think we really struggle at teaching the true practice of dana. And for me, the way I was taught Buddhism is the Buddha taught there are three factors for true dana: pleasant before, pleasant during, and pleasant after. And he said the greatest thing that you can do is give the gift of the Dharma, not necessarily a Dharma talk, but the teaching. How can you live the teaching in your life? And so we've spent the last 19 years almost trying to inspire people, not just to sit on a cushion, not just to talk about the philosophy of Buddhism and how cool Mahayana sutras are, not to just stare at a wall, which I swear to you, I would much rather stare at a wall for the next 50 years of my life if I lived that long, but to get off the cushion and take this practice into the community. So prison outreach, homeless outreach, working in the schools, a lot of these things were listed earlier, but the military, anywhere that you can bring meditation and Buddhist teachings into the community, that is the practice. So I always think of the Dharma Bums Temple and our kind of engaged Buddhist practice as a way of bringing people together to go do good stuff, right? Today's Thursday, so 4:30 today, we had probably 30 people downstairs, and we do a very formal, what we call food redistribution program, and we pick up some food that would have been wasted and thrown away. In this situation, current day, it's bread that would have been thrown away from Bread and Seed Bakery here. And we make what I always refer to as gourmet vegetarian meals, also known as peanut butter and jelly. So we bring 30 people together on average every single week. We make a few hundred sandwiches. We carpool downtown because now it'd be a long walk these days. We're a few miles out of downtown now. We go downtown and we spend about an hour passing out peanut butter and jelly. to to the people living on the street. And our biggest message is to come here isn't so much, as I said earlier, to learn about the specifics of every single Buddhist teaching. It's not even so much to learn every single piece of meditation, although we have all of that. It's to go be of service. And I think for me, individually, again, without getting into my whole life story, I grew up a really angry, sad, depressed kid. And had no reason to be angry, sad, and depressed. My parents have been married 57 years. I was raised in a wonderful home, two older brothers. Everything was wonderful. My mind drove me crazy. And I always thought I wasn't good enough. And what Venerable Isher taught me 22, what she taught me, no, sorry, uh, yeah, 22 years ago, was to go help people. And in that practice of coming out of my sense of self, Buddhist teachings on non-self, depending upon how you interpret that, and that practice of realizing that other people are at the very least equally as important as I am, and being of service to people, that was what helped me. And to this day, anytime I focus on me, then sadness will kick in, depression will kick in, anger will kick in every single day. For me as a Bodhisattva practitioner, and I often, again, for a Western audience, which many of you are, a lot of Western people have a hard time looking at the concept of rebirth, reincarnation, continuation of consciousness, this alaya vijnana, depends on what culture you're from. So for Western people who do not get into or buy into or believe this practice of rebirth or reincarnation, I tell them, look, think of the Bodhisattva vow. Instead of being born life after life to liberate all sentient beings, because that's a pretty heavy vow for somebody who doesn't even think rebirth exists, right? I challenge people to wake up every single day. And when you wake up and you first start your meal and you first look for food, stop for a moment and ask yourself, how many people in this world right now are starving? And what can you do today to make life better for other people? How do we make life better for other people? And if we can bring that into our lives without complicating things, and as I mentioned on the little, on our kind of pre-meeting before this, I really love questions. I want to engage. I mean, it's engaged Buddhism. I'm an engaging person. So I really, I could run on and on and on about the wonderful things we do, but we all do wonderful things. If you're on this call, my guess is you do wonderful things. But what really motivates me and inspires me is to figure out collectively as individuals, what can we do in our lives to engage with other people? Where and how can we engage with other people without complicating things, right? We have a huge, I'll touch on a few other things, but we have probably 30% of our community here is in recovery. So addiction, drugs, alcohol, whatever it might be. So we have classes almost every day, online or in person, or a few of them online as well, for people with addiction. And to me, that is definitely bringing an engaged aspect of meditation and Buddhist practice into people's lives that are really struggling. We have probably 30 to 40%. For those of you who are familiar with San Diego, we're in University Heights. We're right next to Hillcrest, one of the largest LGBTQ communities in the country. And so we have probably 30 to plus percent of the population here at the Dharma Bums Temple is in the Pride community, the LGBTQ community. Where and how can we reach out to these oppressed communities and engage? And when we stop for a moment and we gather with others, and I was talking with Rachel, about these ideas, again, coming back to the simplicity of it. How are we being of service? And often people want to complicate things. My guess is almost everybody on this call has access to a loaf of bread. And you probably have access to a jar of peanut butter and a jar of jelly. And if you make a loaf of bread into peanut butter and jelly and you go 5 miles in just about any direction, you will probably see somebody who is hungry and needs food. And to me, that's the Buddhist message. How can we engage with people? So like I said, I told you, Rachel, Filippo, like, I don't really want to sit here and go on and on about wonderful things we do. We all do wonderful things. I really want to respond to questions and curiosities from everybody. How do you engage? Where do you engage? Where do you feel you lack in engaging in the community? as rambled off in the beginning, very beautifully for the last 20 years, schools, prisons, hospitals, cancer clinics, victims of abuse, domestic violence, Catholic charities, Christian youth groups, youth family services, 10, 12 years with the active and veteran population coming back from combat with PTSD, traumatic brain injury. There's so many people out there who can benefit from learning to sit and breathe, which, oh, by the way, is why I like to kind of share that very brief meditation, because if you can hit a bell, you don't even need a bell. But if you can hit a bell, ask people to close their eyes if they're comfortable and take 3 deep breaths, and 5 minutes later, ask them to open their eyes and reflect on how they feel, you have just shared a meditation practice with people. So I always encourage people. I understand people go through years of meditation training, and I'm not trying to negate the importance of that, right? I'm also not trying to negate the fact that people spend a lot of time and money and effort in training to meditate. But to me, and I'm going to close with this thought before we open to questions, there's a difference in one deep cultivation, spiritual journey on where you're at, and simply bringing a group together to close your eyes for 5 minutes and breathe. So I don't want to take away the beauty and lifelong cultivation of meditation spiritual practice. But the world out there is not looking for a deep cultivation, deep spiritual practice. They're stressed out, they're angry, they're depressed, they're sad, they're anxious. And 5 minutes of closing their eyes and breathing is life-changing, which if you're on this call, you probably know that by now. So yeah, I'd love to, like I said, just to open up to questions.
Zelda asked, in your opinion and experience in the mindfulness community, would you say the most individuals seek Buddhism or mindfulness to transform suffering or to cultivate joy?
Do they seek Buddhism and mindfulness to, let me see, I can probably see the questions here. Can you repeat that last part?
Yeah, sure. The most individuals seek Buddhism or mindfulness to transform suffering or to cultivate joy.
Yeah, I mean, I think at its essence, they're in essence the same thing. This deep spiritual path, this Buddhist path, this ending of suffering, as I like to say, decreased suffering. The side effect, the byproduct of that is increased joy. At the same time, if you increase joy, you will also decrease suffering. Many of us will be familiar with the word dukkha, and why we translate that immediately to suffering, I have no idea, because dukkha is discomfort, angst, dissatisfaction, dis-ease. Suffering sounds so heavy, so traumatic, right? And yes, many, if not all of us, have had heavy suffering in our lives, death, loss, trauma, abuse, things like that. We've also had our sandwiches made the wrong way. We didn't get the mayonnaise we wanted. They didn't get enough pumps of whatever in your latte. So majority of our days are filled with little moments of dukkha. And if we begin to recognize that less dukkha is greater joy is less dukkha, in essence, it's the same thing. But the question about what are people seeking, I personally think for someone who's been around meditation Buddhist communities for 25 years, really, is first and foremost, I think people are seeking Sangha. I think they're seeking community. And I think within seeking community, from that comes this exploration of how do I find joy? And I can say from the Dharma Bums Temple, if I lead a class and there's 50, 60 people here and I say, how many of you are Buddhist? You're going to see 0 hands go up, except for the one person who's like, they're not really sure if their hand should go up or not, right? So to put it into context, I'm a Jewish kid in an old Christian church leading a Buddhist community filled with people who are not Buddhist. So the people who are coming here, they're not even looking to become Buddhist or even necessarily for Buddhism. They just want to be happy. They want to be peaceful. They want to get to their day without feeling like they have to jump off a cliff. And whether that means decreased dukkha or increased joy, however you phrase it, I think they're looking for community. They're looking for Sangha. And, I believe Thich Nhat Hanh, who's, I can't believe I've gone this far about Engaged Buddhism and not even mentioned Thich Nhat Hanh. Thich Nhat Hanh is Engaged Buddhism, his work with Martin Luther King and social justice work, and nominated for Nobel Peace Prize, right? He said that to him, he always looked at the future Buddha, per se, as being the Sangha, the community. So I ultimately think they're suffering and they're looking for community and they want to suffer less. I hope it helps.
How can practitioners maintain mindfulness and compassion while working for social justice?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's a I love speaking with people I don't know, but it's also challenging when I'm speaking with people I do know that they're used to me already, so they kind of get things. I don't have to preface this much, but let me preface this by saying that um, the world is a mess right now. The world has always been a mess, and sadly, the world will probably always be a mess. But the question is, are you a mess? And I mean that with all the love and respect to everybody here, right? When I say, are you a mess? I'm really looking in the mirror saying to myself, am I a mess? And oh, by the way, anytime I share Buddhist teachings, I'm really just talking to myself. As I always say, if I can do like 30% of the things wholeheartedly that I'm talking about, then I'm good with that as a practitioner. We're all practicing. But specifically to that question, when we engage, which we should, often people come to meditation, Buddhism, Dharma Bums Temple here as an escape. We've had so many escapes in our lives, some of them healthy, some of them unhealthy, right? Some of them kind of neutral. But to me, meditation, Buddhist practice, mindfulness is not an escape. It is direct perception into the present moment. And in the present moment, there's filled with experiences around us, conflict, chaos, difficulty, challenges. This is life. And so we do not meditate to be good, in my opinion, to be good at meditation. We do not practice Buddhism to be able to rattle off a bunch of words. We practice so when we get off the cushion or move out of the temple walls and go into the world, that when we engage, as I said, the world is a mess. To me, the Buddha was an activist, he was a rebel, and he fought for what he believed in. I believe that Buddhists need to continue to get out there around social justice issues and fight for what they believe. But here's the catch. When you are fighting for what you believe, when you are speaking, when you're marching, when you're at rallies, when you're holding signs, are you coming from a place of greed, anger, and ignorance, and hatred and rage? Or are you coming from a place of loving kindness and compassion? This has to be the question first, is to ask ourselves as we're holding up signs pointing at how terrible everybody else is. To me, I ask myself, have I ever caused harm? Absolutely 100%. Have I ever done things that were really just terrible and just tragic that other people suffered from? Absolutely. Am I any better than anybody else? Absolutely not. So for me as a practitioner, before I start pointing fingers and blaming everybody else for everything that's wrong in the world, I have to have love and compassion for myself. And then from there, I need to look at everybody who has different opinions than I do and different views. I'll come back to Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching. There's a teaching titled, What is Nirvana? 7 minutes and 42 seconds, I believe. If you just Google what is Nirvana, Thich Nhat Hanh. And he says, Nirvana, freedom from suffering, is freedom from views. He goes on to say, all views are wrong. Right now, he passed, as many of you know, a couple years ago, so we can't argue with him directly. But the first time I heard all views are wrong, I thought, well, that's wrong. I don't agree with that, right? And so the idea is that we have our views, and many of my views are not going to change. Some will change, some will alter, some will get stronger, some will get weaker. But when I'm engaging around social justice issues, if I just immediately think everybody else is wrong, there's no place for dialogue. There's no place for discussion. There's no place for understanding. There's no place for forgiveness. There's no place for love. And there's no place for ever getting along. So we've all caused harm. And for me, I check myself before I go into social justice issues and make sure that I'm not angry and pissed off and thinking I'm above everybody else. I talk about, it's a thing called Buddhist arrogance that I talk about quite a bit. For me, I was in Buddhism for like 6 weeks, and all of a sudden I started judging people for doing things I was doing 7 weeks ago. So I think that's something we should caution ourselves. That just because we practice meditation in Buddhism, it doesn't mean we're better than other people.
Question. How can we start doing something? Sometimes it feels very overwhelming that there's so much to do and we are only one or two people.
Definitely. You ever seen that meme that goes around? If you think you're too small to make a difference, try spending the night with a mosquito. I think you've seen that, but I love that one. I assure you that it seems like everything is in our face with social media, everything in the world. We definitely should keep our eyes open to it. And so while if you feel that there are people in the world who are starving to death and you're not able to go directly to them, to feed people who are starving to death, nor maybe have the resources to help people who are starving to death. Find somebody else to feed. There are little ways. Often I find, again, especially currently in the people that show up here, the questions are the same, and so people think very big, like we have to save the world tomorrow, right? We're not saving the world tomorrow, but there is somebody, as I'm always saying here, we're 5 miles from downtown San Diego, and there are 10,000 people right now sitting on the street who struggle for food every day. So while we're looking at these global issues and thinking we want to save the world, we're walking by 10,000 people on the streets who don't have food to eat. So I just think, to your question, bring it local. Yes, we want to save the world. We want to save every starving person, all the children, but bring it local. I go back to when Venerable Leisure said to me in 2003, right? 22 years ago, Jeff, just go help people. I got in my car, I drove around, and I just looked for people to help. It didn't matter what it was. Everybody somewhere needs help. Go to a shopping center, a grocery store. Push the shopping carts back into where they belong. Help people carry out bags, right? Go down to wherever neighborhood park or beach or bay or mountain or street. Pick up trash. And people think, yes, but there's people dying. I understand that. But what are you doing? When we help people, we feel good. It's that simple. When we do good things, we feel good. And when we feel good, I believe that helps cultivate the seeds of compassion and wisdom. So then we ultimately might know better ways to help people. But if we just sit there angry and miserable and frustrated with everything, we'll just sulk and sit on our couch and blame the world and stare at social media for 5 hours and think there's nothing we can do. Every single one of us right now could help somebody tonight in some small way. Call a loved one that you haven't talked to, that you're angry at, right? Half of you are probably in a fight with somebody right now. No offense to half of you. I don't even know nor see half of you, right? But we argue constantly with people. Forgive them, apologize to them, send them a text, reach out, help somebody in a small way. Super simple.
Thank you, Jeff. That was very inspiring.
Yeah.
Emily has a question. What advice would you give to someone contemplate a career change to be more of service? And what tips do you have for finding or creating Sangha? Thank you.
What was the last part again? What
tips do you have for finding or creating a Sangha?
Yeah, the tips for finding and creating a Sangha, and the career change. I think first and foremost with the career change, we look at Buddhist teachings around right livelihood, and obviously you want to be comfortable with what you're doing. Again, I don't know the people, but I always caution with career change. Often people think that if they just change careers, that everything's going to get better. There's the big yoga craze, an example. Everybody loves yoga, so they want to become a yoga instructor. No offense to any yoga instructors here, but they want to become a yoga instructor because they love doing yoga. And next thing you know, 3 years later, they're stressed out and miserable with the business of running a yoga studio. They're no longer even doing yoga. So, we started, as was mentioned, Delta Beta Tau, the nation's first and only Buddhist fraternity at San Diego State University, right? So we've been running this for 10 years. And you get these college kids coming out of school and they're thinking, I don't want these corporate jobs, et cetera, et cetera. But if they have a decent job and they make some good money, they can do good stuff with that, right? You can't just float around sitting under a tree all day long thinking that you're going to sustain yourself. Also, if you're married, you have family, right? This is not like Buddhist practice is not your free pass to say, sorry, I'm going to go save the world, right? We have responsibilities. We have livelihood that we need to maintain at a baseline for ourselves, unless, our lives are different. But many here are probably not monks or nuns living in a monastery where you have those resources. So I think often people tend to want to be so quick to jump out of jobs thinking that there's just this perfect little Sangha to jump into that's going to save everything. Do good stuff, be happy with what you do, work hard. As far as tips for starting or joining a Sangha, it depends on where you are. But again, San Diego, for example, within 15 miles of here, there's probably 40 Buddhist temples. We're spoiled. And I tell people to go to all of them, right? Go check them out. There's a Vietnamese temple, Korean temple, Taiwanese temple, Japanese temple, Thai temple, Lao temple, Cambodian temple. Go to all of them. See where you feel comfortable as far as finding a Sangha. Go into Google, go into Meetup, put in meditation, Buddhism, and the city you live in. You'll find 10 places. You'll go to 10 of them. Some of them might be a little strange. Some of them will make you feel uncomfortable. Maybe you like the strange place. Maybe you think it's weird. Maybe you think it's beautiful. Go. If you hate it, it's probably not the worst hour of your life. You learned something, but you just show up. So finding a place really just requires a Google search, Meetup, or Yelp these days, right? I mean, you can, believe it or not, you can leave Yelp reviews for Buddhist temples, which I still think is hysterical. But just show up. Starting a Sangha, the tips I have there go into it first and foremost. I mean, I'm 19 years into this. Your level of patience and your level of practice it's a whole nother level. Because when you open your doors to host community, you're in essence inviting in a world of people who are really struggling and suffering and looking for something. And hosting that can be challenging. But to kind of tone it down a notch, as an example, a lot of people leave Dharma Bums Temple, they move somewhere else, and I get an email that says, hey, we're trying to find something like Dharma Bums, because we are super casual, very user friendly, very Western friendly, very different than traditional Buddhist temples. And so people often tell me they're looking for something like that. And I say, look, don't complicate things. Find a Buddhist book, a Buddhist text that you like. Create a meetup group. Say meditation and book study using Buddhist teachings. If 5 people show up, 5 of you can sit around your living room. You can do a brief meditation. There's a free script out there everywhere for meditation. And you can talk about the book you're reading, right? You don't have to go out. I mean, we just went out and started a temple, which is kind of ridiculous to begin with, right? But we didn't even start it with any vision of the future. We started the Dharma Bum Temple simply because we wanted to create a place for people to learn and feel comfortable with Buddhist teaching and the meditation practice. But in very traditional, I mean, my personal background is heavily in Pure Land and Zen Chan practice, right? I am a Pure Land Chan practitioner to my core. But the Dharma Bum Temple is not a Pure Land temple. It is not a Chan temple. We have Tibetan classes, Mahayana classes, the Vajrayana classes. We host all the different lineages. So I still think it's important to stick to very core fundamental Buddhist teachings and not stray from that if you're going to do Buddhist practice. But I'm a believer that you need a couple people in a book and you can benefit from that. That's where we started.
And she asked the intention versus actual effectiveness. Sometimes I'm not sure whether my attempts at helping are in fact only further perpetuating more fundamental problems. For example, if every day I provide food for my younger brother, such that he does not need to find a job, I risk perpetuating a further problem of complacency and dependency.
Yeah, beautiful question. These are all beautiful questions, but this question really looking at the heart of Buddhist teachings, as many of you know, the 2 wings of Buddhism is wisdom and compassion. One of my first Buddhist teachers, another Taiwanese nun, she said, Jeff, she accused me of being all compassion and no wisdom. And I thought she was all wisdom and no compassion. Ultimately, she was right. I was wrong. Go figure. But you really have to have both. Compassion without wisdom can get you into trouble. Wisdom without compassion can get you into trouble. And your question really, to me, is addressing the cultivation of ultimate wisdom. And, to my knowledge of Buddhist teachings, the Buddha praised Subhuti, one of his, foremost disciples in wisdom. He asked Subhuti to give a discourse on wisdom. My understanding is that Subhuti sat down, said nothing, and the Buddha, in essence, patted him on the back and said, good job, right? Because he was silent about wisdom. 2 things I'll say, and I'll kind of close with a story. But first thing is, often people ask about how do I cultivate ultimate wisdom? Because that's in essence what you're asking about, this intention, which is coming from a pure place. I'll give a story about this in a minute. You don't know what the result's going to be. And so for me, this practice of cultivating ultimate wisdom begins with understanding that I don't know what ultimate wisdom is, but I know when I do something really dumb, really harmful, really just not smart. And my guess is all of you, for the most part, know when you do something you shouldn't have done, you usually know that. Maybe not immediately, but pretty quickly after. So my kind of talk on wisdom always starts with getting people to understand all those things that you do that you know are not beneficial to this path of practice. Stop it. And if you stop doing those things, by default, you're actually cultivating greater wisdom. The second piece to your question, and I'll close with a story. Um, Funny, I'm telling this story here. It's my favorite. It's my snail story. So let's see. I started Shifang Temple in 2003. I was there maybe about a year. I'd gone through the precept ceremony, all these things, and I'm learning about non-harming and not killing. And all of a sudden, I had this memory back from when I was a child, and I used to step on snails as a kid. It hurts me to say it, but as a 10-year-old kid, I used to step on snails. And all of a sudden, I took these precepts, I'm learning about non-harming, and I'm feeling tremendous shame and guilt and remorse. Like I was devastated at how many snails I used to step on, coming home from school or whatever it was. And so I went on this, your question directly, I went on this like save the snail campaign, right? So for like 2 years, every time I saw a snail, I would pick it up and I would move it and I would pick it up and I would move it. And I thought I was like, I knew that I wasn't making up for the snails. I had already ended their journey, but I felt like I was giving back to the snail community at large. And so I'm moving all these snails. And I'm thinking like, I'm such a compassionate Buddhist. Look at me. I'm so wonderful. I'm on this Bodhisattva path. I was such an arrogant Buddhist. And after like a year and a half of that, all of a sudden it hit me one day. I was walking and the way the sidewalk was, and I realized, Jeff, you're such an idiot. Like, what are you doing? I would take the snails who were like on the sidewalk, I would move them and put them on the grass without realizing I don't know where the snail is going. Maybe the snail was actually going in the opposite direction. Now the snail turns around, goes back the opposite direction, and in their effort to go back to where they were going, they got stepped on. So karma, action, law of cause and effect. My intention to help them actually caused them to get stepped on. The other thing is if I move them in the grass, you can't see them. And if they're on the sidewalk, at least you can see them. So to your question, I played in my head a million things about what is the ultimate wisest thing. And my guess is you're not talking about snails. You're talking about one, someone you care about, somebody deeply important in your life. And all you can come back to for me, my advice, my practice is now when I see the snails, I'm not kidding. I pause, I join palms, I give my Namo Omitofo, I wish them well, and I leave them alone. My heart, my intention is with them. I hope they survive, but they are on their own journey, and I'm done messing with them. Now, when it comes to loved ones with, addiction, things like that, my brief advice generally is the same thing. You talk for them. You let them know you're there for them, right? Talk to a loved one, a little bit different than a snail. You can give them guidance. You can give them advice. But ultimately, we all know we make our own decisions. And if people know that you love them, you care for them, you want them to be well, and you opened your heart and your arms to them, they still have to walk through and accept it. But if our intention is love and compassion, I think that's the best to do as, an enlightened being. So
A recommendation for three titles for reading books to begin to learn more about Buddhism.
Yeah. So my favorite go-to from the beginning, Master Xing Yun wrote Lotus in the Stream. It's actually out of print. They changed the title, a different translator, but Lotus in the Stream on Amazon. You can get it. There's one copy out there for like $150. You don't need that one. The other ones are the same. It's translated by Tom Graham. And I think for a Western audience, Tom was at the time about a 50-year-old guy living in middle America, strong Chinese Mandarin background, strong Buddhist practice, worked closely with Master Xing Yun. And they go through the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, Paramitas, dependent origination, karma, rebirth, how to study Buddhism. I think that's in the first chapter, but it's all the basic Buddhist teachings, fundamental Buddhist teachings. And I think that's an excellent kind of starter book. with all the core teachings. And the second one for me, again, as a Zen practitioner, which is in many ways the opposite of Lotus in the Stream, Suzuki Roshi's Zen Beginner Mind. I think for those that really like to think and try to figure stuff out and think the way, I think Zen Beginner Mind brings us back to that beginner's mind and helps us appreciate this present moment and to scatter all of these views that we have and to work deeper from a place of love and compassion with everything we do. Because we really can make a difference. If you're here, if you're on this call, if you join this class, there's that deep kind of karmic seed in you that the path is important to you. So as you continue on your bodhisattva journeys and your Buddhist paths, please take care of yourself first and foremost, right? If we don't take care of ourselves, we can't help anybody else. But engage with people any way that you can to give them a hug, give them a smile, send them a quick text. Even an emoji these days, the right emoji can just brighten someone's day. That's the world we're living in. It's come down to like, if you give the right emoji, they will be happy. So there are simple ways that we can engage in community without feeling like we have to save the world. And I think on that note, any Thich Nhat Hanh book is really beautiful. You can't go wrong as well, especially when it comes to engaged Buddhist practice.
Coming into Buddhism, and I grew up as a Catholic tradition, there's a lot of known self, known attachment. So how do you reconcile these known with instead, a lot of others?
Yeah. I think that in brief, this teaching on non-self, which of course, as soon as Jeff, begin to talk about non-self, I'm very far off from what non-self actually is. But in an effort to put it into words, for me, the way I explain non-self, especially for those maybe here who are new, non-self here at the first time often gets kind of interpreted as that we're not here, we don't exist, or we don't matter. The teachings of non-attachment, which you ask about, also kind of, I'm glad you said non-attachment. As a wonderful educated Buddhist, many new people will say detached or not attached. And so non-attachment is not a cutting off. It's not a detaching. It's not a severing from. To me, non-attachment is absolute love. Like engaged Buddhism is non-attachment. The bodhisattva practice of generosity, no gift, no giver, no receiver, right? So as we're practicing non-self, which means we are here, we are physically here, but we are just here differently from how we perceive ourselves to be. Meaning I have a story about Jeff. If I ask 10 people to tell me a story about me, they'll tell me a story. All these stories are different. These are just stories. Our entire life is a story in our head. But what we actually are doing is living a trillion years over a trillion moments, moment-to-moment experiences that come together in this present moment. There is no absolute one Jeff. It's just some name my parents gave me. But my actions are what's important. And so when we engage in this non-attached practice of going to help people, the key is to give without any attachment to the gift, to give a receiver, meaning when we go to help people, don't expect anything in return. I learned this years ago, coming back to my parents' house and we do a big one on Thanksgiving every year, and taking this chocolate cake. And I remember passing out chocolate cake, which I grew up with. It was like the greatest thing in the world. And I remember trying to give out my mom's chocolate cake to the people living on the streets of downtown San Diego, and people turning it down. And I'm thinking, are you crazy? How could you turn down this chocolate cake? But I was attached to wanting people to receive what I was giving them. Sometimes we give kindness and it will be met with kindness. Sometimes we give kindness and it will be met with hatred and anger. And you know what that means? We need to give more kindness. But if we get wrapped up in the self that says, oh, I'm Jeff, I'm angry, you didn't receive my gift. Oh, you're muted still, Felipe. If I get wrapped up in the gift, then it's over. No gift, no giver, no receiver. Give without expecting anything in return. No strings attached. Benny Voyager, last thing I'll say is she taught me from the very beginning, practice expecting nothing from anyone ever. And that is the way of the Bodhisattva. So we continue. So I just want to thank all of you. again, to Dharma Realm Buddhist University, Rachel, everybody for setting this up. Truly a tremendous honor to be here with you all. So thank you.